Welcome to Of Sound Mind and Spirit. I'm Shelly.
And I'm Lisa. We're sisters walking together on a journey of faith. We're not perfect.
And we definitely don't have all the answers. We're inviting you to walk with us as we explore ways we can better know and grow in our faith together. Welcome back to another episode from Of Sound Mind and Spirit. This is Shelly.
And this is Lisa.
So Lisa and I traveled this past weekend to say goodbye to our aunt who passed away a few days before Easter. I had actually attended a funeral just before that also, and we have another one coming up this coming weekend. And I thought that we might talk today about the sad season of life that we're in. It just feels like we've had a lot of funerals lately.
We should be grateful that we're going to funerals of older people and not younger people. I mean, we've both lost friends our age. We've lost young people near us. And I'm very grateful that the people that we've been to, going to funerals for right now have lived very long lives. But it's still sad. There's still a lot of grief in, attending these funerals and losing them.
It's like the end of an era is what it feels like for me. Kind of an end of our childhood in a way, because there are so many memories we have with our aunt. She was very close to us and our family. And we grew up in a very tight family.
I think for me, one thing that hit me this weekend as I'm talking to our cousins, it's the realization that this is, that the next generation above us, or our parents' generation, we've lost a few kind of in a short period of time and in that group. And it just, like you said, cycle of life. And it makes you definitely realize that, I don't want to say our generation we need to step up, and the passing of the torch to all of us. And it kind of a funny moment. The cousins and I, we were laughing about something, and we were like, why are we sitting around waiting for 70 and 80-year-olds to tell us something or do something? I'm like, we're all mature, middle-aged women. Like, we run our own lives and our families and all of that. So, it's almost that moment when you realize, oh no, now we're the adults. We'll call it the adults in the room. And not only are we busy taking care of and raising our children, young adults, but now we're also needing to really be aware and look after our parents and that group. And so, in addition to the grief of her passing, I kind of had that realization wake up moment. And I will say the drive home, the hours in the car by myself, I really thought about all of that. Just like not only the grief of losing her, but then what's coming for us.
How we feel about the idea of what the next, hopefully, 10 to 15 years bring.
That's very helpful.
For me, mom and dad aren't that far away from me. They're not that old from me. They were young when they had me. And I'm just not ready to be that old yet. Does that make sense? For me, I feel like time just got really short all of a sudden.
Yeah. Well, I on that note, we were, my son was asking me like, okay, who's that? Who's that? And I was saying, well, that's my youngest cousin, and he's like, well, how old is he? And I'm like, oh, he's like a baby. And then I'm like, oh, wait a minute.
He's over 40.
Yeah, no, he's not a baby anymore. So, but I do want to put a pin in this for a minute, because we are very blessed to have our parents with us. And many, many, many of our friends our age lost their parents a while back. Like I still have not only our parents, but I still have my in-laws too. And, so I know some of you, dear listeners, are probably listening and going, wait a minute, your parents are still here. You're talking about this older generation that's still with you. And I know that is something that is such a blessing and a privilege that so many people don't have. I mean, that our kids have had the opportunity to really get to know their grandparents. And that can be very unusual.
Yeah, I lost my mother-in-law 22 years ago. This week, I am the same age that she was when she passed away.
I think that this realization, this kind of wake up moment, like you just said about your mother in law, or the fact that we're losing this generation and we need to be the adults in the room. I think this is one of the reasons we're talking about this. I think this is a common thing for especially women of our generation, us Gen Xers or older millennial people. This is where we are.
I thought you were going to say women our age.
Women our age, middle-aged women. But I think this is where we are, and it brings up a whole, in the middle of grief, it brings up a whole host of other emotions for us, and it's very confusing.
I'm so glad that I was at the funeral, but it was really, really nice to see the cousins again.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me, why do we wait for funerals? Because we're so busy
Yeah.
with life, right? But why are we waiting until someone is gone?
Mm-hmm. We need to make that plan for us all to get together, and it's funny because the aunts have planned. They call like family reunions, family get-togethers over the years. They've tried it, and I don't think I made a single one of them because it's in a different. I mean, I have to drive 3 or 4 hours, and family life is busy, and all of the things you have to juggle. And so I know I haven't made them, and now I'm saying, wait a minute, I've missed these things. And I think that's part of our, I'll say, midlife process, is that with our parents getting older, us getting older, losing people, it reminds us of what's important in life.
The value of these relationships and our connection to one another.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I can remember when Grandpa's sisters started passing away. And it was in the late 80s, I think, that one did. And that's when they restarted the family reunions, because they said the same thing then that we're saying now,
Mm-hmm.
which is, why are we seeing our cousins only at these funerals? Why
Mm-hmm.
aren't we seeing our cousins in happier times? Like weddings and baby showers, like in the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. It is interesting in that talking to my son was with me and talking to him about who everybody was and the connections. And I was telling him stories, and it really just brought me back to how close we all were. I mean, we all used to travel together,
Mhm.
take vacations together. And I mean, not just holidays, but we would go stay at each other's houses if our parents were out of town, or, things like that. And then I look over, there was a kids' table that I wasn't at, thankfully, at this
Mhm.
reception. It was kind of nice, being 50 and not at the kids' table. Um, that the kids were at this kids' table, and I saw your kids, my son, and then our brother's kids, and they were all together. And I thought, they are so close right now. We travel together. They, have their own group chat, all this stuff. They are what we were. And I look at them and I think, are they going to grow up and lose touch like we have, even though we all don't live that far apart? And it made me really sad.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, my cousins and I, we still share all of those bonds and memories and family relationships. So why are we letting it slip away? I don't know.
I have a question,
Okay.
because my husband's side of the family, they did not know their mother's cousins. There's not as many of my husband and his cousins as there are of us and our cousins, or our kids and their cousins.
Mm-hmm.
But they're still fairly close. They're not super tight, but they're still close. And it occurs to me, like, my youngest doesn't know who any of their kids are. He still asks us when we talk about this cousin or that cousin on my husband's side.
Mm-hmm.
He's still like, well, who is that? And, they're
Mm.
6 hours away from us. And so what you were just saying, is this normal, is what I was getting at. Is our family normal, that we're that tight, that we still know all our cousins, that we communicate with our cousins Rarely now, but we grew up traveling together. We grew up doing all of these things together. Or is that unique?
I don't think there is normal. I really don't. When it comes to family relationships, every family is different. My husband only has two cousins, and my kids actually are close to those cousins' kids. So we see them quite frequently. They're the same age as my kids. And so they know them and they call them their cousins.
Do
So,
they live in town?
yeah, they do.
Okay.
They live in town. And so, um, I don't know what a normal is or isn't. When the kids were younger, we were closer to our cousins' kids because they were the same age. And so we used to get together. It really wasn't until, life got busy. I think that's something I look back on now that I'm not as busy because most of my kids are out of the house. Um, I look back on the busyness of school aged kids and I think, why did I let it consume my life? Why did I not prioritize relationships and family as much as I should have?
I would argue that you did. You prioritized and focused on your children and your family at home. And I think that's a normal evolution because we do tend to gravitate away from our parents' families and create our own families. And so the circle tightens. And as our circle tightens, some of the family members end up on the outer rim of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it does. But I also look at all the things that we did constantly in the busyness. And this is just me and my reflective state that I'm in as I'm sending my youngest off to school. In that I spent a lot of years just driving, busy, 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 all of the activities. And I wonder if it was a good trade off. And I'm not sure it was. Did I forego family for activities?
I'm also going to lay a little bit of fault at social media, the evolution of being able to stay connected through social media without actually physically seeing each other or calling each other. Because when I got together with some of our cousins this weekend, I'm like, oh, I saw on social media that you did XYZ last weekend or last month. And how was that? And oh, did you change jobs? It looks like on social media that you are doing something different. And those are the kinds of things we wouldn't have known about each other unless we wrote a letter. And I do have letters from our cousins when I was living away from home. Or we would have picked up the phone and called, or we'd have heard through the grapevine. Our family had a fantastic grapevine that I don't really feel as connected to anymore. Like if somebody did something in Austin, we all knew about it within 48 hours. It was kind of funny. And
Yeah.
like, did you hear that so and so got an award
I'm not
at the
sure if
such and
that was
such?
grapevine or gossip, but we'll just say that.
Potato, potato. We always called it the grapevine.
The family gossip mill was running strong for a while. Yeah. I agree with that in that social media gives us this false closeness because you know what's going on with each other in a way. You see pictures of events and things, and so you feel like you know them. You feel like you're close, but you don't actually, directly communicate with one another.
You don't have those conversations that we used to have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that hopefully I look at, this passing and funeral and the one coming up this weekend, we'll see everyone again, same side of the family. It's like we need these little reminders. We're celebrating a life. We're honoring a beloved family member. And in that, what do we take away? And part of this, I would say, rededication on my part to wanting to be close to cousins and family, I look at that as something, honoring her, honoring our aunt by wanting to stay close to everyone else.
Yep. Because I don't know if we've talked about this or not, but it came up quite often during the funeral. And that was that family was the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Family comes first. I will not tell you how many times I heard that in the last 2 weeks. Family comes first. And it's
Mm-hmm.
one of those things, but you don't often think about until you have to.
Exactly. And it was all those conversations we had that we were all raised, with that. And so that's why we were there. That's why we dropped everything and went. Um,
There were a lot of family traits on full view there. And every time that someone got up and spoke about our aunt, I found myself nodding, going, yes, yes. And the apple didn't fall that far from the tree. I see that in my own family and in my own
mhm.
children and in yours. And I wonder if that's just who we are as a family. That work ethic came up often.
I think that, well, I think I would like to believe that all families have those, that they all have similar traits and sayings, and that it's instilled, in every family has their own little things that are instilled in.
So I mentioned that work ethic, and our cousin made a post on social media that I immediately identified with as a common trait or a common value. And she was saying that she hasn't had or made the time really to process her mother's death. I hate saying that word, but because she's been so busy. And I identified immediately with it because with deaths on my husband's side of the family, when it first happens, I go into what I like to call the Henley mode, which is you stop everything and you put all of your time and attention and focus on what must be done. There's a lot of things that have to happen immediately. And I'm not going to say it's a checklist. I'm going to say it's a way of protecting yourself from being overwhelmed by emotion, that you go
Mm-hmm.
right into business mode. Okay. All right. We need to do this. We need to notify this. We need to do this. We need to take care of dad. And you just go. But at some point after the funeral, it stops. And it can be very crushing, the waves of grief and emotion that then come, and you don't know what to do with yourself, because before you were keeping busy and you could
Mm-hmm.
keep it out of your thoughts. But then you're kind of out there. And now what? Now we have that future where the world didn't stop turning, and every day we live forward is a day we live without them. So now more than anything is when I know we need to start checking up on our cousins, our uncle, our parents, to make sure that they know, we're still here and we aren't forgetting that this has happened, and that we know you might need us or need someone to talk to, but we're there for you.
What was really beautiful about her post was how many of her friends
Oh, yeah.
jumped in, and they didn't say you're right or you're wrong or anything like that. They just shared kind of their thoughts, prayers, feelings, experiences with grief, and also, really made sure she knew that they were there for them. It was really, to me, that's what social media should be about, right? Is that love and connection. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And then also the reminder that everyone grieves, differently, and that it comes in waves and it's not always at the same point. And like you said, that people really do need that check in, follow up, continued prayers, continued support, um,
Connection.
connection. Yeah, for a long time.
Yeah. Her friends made me feel like they just gave her this huge, warm hug. Like they just completely surrounded her and
Mm-hmm.
said, we'll hold you up. You are right. And it's okay for you to grieve. And we're here for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And we talked about it when we were there in person on Saturday. She and I did talk about it briefly. And I just told her how beautiful it was that she was so open and vulnerable and was willing to share that, and just how far it went, I think, in not only what her friends told her, but, how it could impact other people who are experiencing very similar things and aren't, didn't put it out there publicly.
I think a lot of times we're uncomfortable with death and we don't know how to respond and react and what to say. I know I feel that often.
Mm-hmm.
because I'm always afraid I will say the wrong thing, or that what I say will create more emotion in the other
Mm-hmm.
person, and not always good emotion,
Yeah.
but I also know that the last thing they want is for their loved one to be forgotten or not remembered.
Mm-hmm.
So with certain people, even years and years after their loss, I make it a point to make sure I say their name and say, "Hey, I know what today is. I know you're missing this person, and I love you. I'm here for you."
Mm-hmm. You talk about not saying the right thing. I spent the first, I think, 10 minutes at the funeral home going, oh, no, I shouldn't have said that. Oh, what did I just say? So it is something that we do. We don't always say and do the right things, but that's okay. I mean, I'm not going to beat myself up over it. And in fact, one of my cousins, I said something, and I go, "That probably wasn't the right thing to say to you right now." She's like, "No." And then, but she was tearing up, and so then we both started laughing, and I was like, "I'm sorry," but it still was a moment, and I'd rather say something incorrectly than avoid her. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. And it's our
So,
cousin. So there is also that element of family that you can kind of give each other that look like, did you really just, oh, did I really just?
oh,
And
I shouldn't give me a look. I just said it. I'm sorry. I didn't. Not today.
it's funny, isn't it, after all these years, that there are some family members you can just kind of, after a few minutes of awkwardness, just kind of pick right back up with. And it's like you're,
Yes.
8, 10, 13, 20 years old again. And, you have all
That's
these common shared memories together.
Yes, and that's what I was talking about. Once we got talking again at lunch. It's just, I'm not going to say it was like it was when we were young, because of course we're not young, but it's different than we were in our 20s and 30s. And
Yes.
I will say, when we were in our 20s and even 30s, I feel like you do so much growth in those years that you feel different. They're different, you're different. You just don't feel that closeness. And now, gosh, I keep talking about how old I am. Now in my 50s, I'm back to all that doesn't matter. All that doesn't matter. What matters now is we're still family. We still have that connection. So all that weirdness you might have felt in those middle years of trying to figure out who you are and raise your family and all of this,
Angst.
yeah, now I'm back to just, you know what? None of that stuff in the middle matters. It matters that we still are family and have this connection, and we need to just embrace each other and spend time together and appreciate the family we have, that's still
Yeah,
here.
really do.
Shelly, what's interesting is that we started this episode, and we really had the intention of speaking more about the grieving process and about praying for our loved ones who are deceased and things like that. And this is why I like doing this podcast with you, because it changed from grief. It really changed into appreciating the connection and the family that we have, and the
Mhm.
people and the relationships, and how death is a reminder for us to appreciate and love those around us, those people that we still have with us, that we are blessed to still be able to touch and see and hug and say, I love you. And we did, I love how organically we had that realization while we're recording. It's funny how that happens.
Yep. Unfortunately, death is a part of life. It's part of that cycle. And this is where we are. There's always times to reconcile with one another while we're alive. So if there's anybody that you've been at odds with,
And also, if somebody you haven't talked to in a while, maybe there's a family member or a dear friend that you haven't seen or heard from or talked to, maybe this is just that reminder to reach out, send them a card like we talked about in our episode about writing, about letters. Maybe send them just a lovely greeting card and just say, I miss you and I hope that your day is well. Or, I, I really, in the midst of my grief for our family members, I really want, I say, good things to come from these experiences and our grieving process. And so for me, that is to really reach out and reestablish those family connections that maybe, I haven't focused on so much in the last 10, 20 years.
And something else came to mind as you were speaking, and that is how we're modeling our response and reaction to our children. Because our young adults one day will be in the shoes that we are in. Ooh, that's a hard one to think about. But just as mom and dad modeled for us how to deal with grief and loss and reconnecting with their extended family, we are hopefully going to model to our young adults that we can take something that feels like a devastating loss and turn it into something that can be good. And that is getting back together with family and,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe introducing them and saying, yes, this is, the son and daughter of our younger cousin, and this is their mom. And yes, you've met them before.
Yes, yes.
You just don't remember because you were 3.
Yes, really honor the memory of your loved one by continuing those burying the hatchet maybe if there's any issues, and just continuing to love your family.
Yeah. All right. Lisa, since this episode didn't go quite the way we had planned, I do want to give a shout out to some friends of ours who do run a podcast specifically about grief. And so if that's something you're interested in, I mean, please stay subscribed to us, but we also want to encourage you to look up Morning Glory, and that's Mourning, like to be in mourning glory. And it's run by our friends Andrea Bear and Jennifer Thomas. So check them out if that's of interest to you.
And thanks as always for listening. And we invite you to subscribe to our email newsletter. You can go to our website, soundmindandspirit.com, and scroll to the bottom of the page and put in your email address to stay connected with us in between podcasts.
And we'd also love to hear from you if you've had an experience with death in the family and how something positive like reconnecting with family grew out of that. Check in with us on social media or send us an email. We'd really love to know. I think it would be very comforting to not feel alone in that. Okay. Are you going to run off to the Hallmark store now and find some thinking of you cards? Do I need to gift you some?
No. I think I've got some in my closet somewhere.
Well, if you don't, I probably have a handful in this drawer over here, so I'm happy to share. Thanks, everyone, for being with us.
All right. We will see you next week.